Okay, I think we might have solved the problem. We'll find out on the back end, right? Basically I had this light that was breaking through the trees right here, and it's like exactly where I need to be working, and that's frustrating. So, I am going to start with a red right here, and I just have my color wheel. I'll have this available for you so you can reference it whenever you would like if this is your first time making a color wheel. And I am debating still at this moment as we speak what colors I should use, but I think I'm going to use this little set right here, which is this semi-moist Yarka set, because this is what I've been buying for all of my beginning students right now, and I just think maybe it's speaking to me as the place where we should start. So I'm gonna get this set out of the way for right now, and I'm just gonna put this set right here. This is also a mixing tray here, so if this is all I had, I could use it, but I'm just gonna set it up, and I'm gonna keep this mixing tray here. And this is a good time to mention that I also have in my possession paper towels, both to clean my brushes and to stay close in case I do any spilling. If you are consuming a beverage, alcoholic or non, whatever you've got, if you are right-handed, you want all of your paint set up on your right-hand side so that you're coming from your paint over to your paper. If you're left-handed, you swap that. But if you're right-handed, you want your drinking beverage over on your left-hand side, or even down on the ground or on a table next to you, so that you're not putting your brush in it. We are all guilty of putting a brush in our glass of water, in our glass of wine, in our tea, in our beer, whatever it is that you may be drinking, and we don't want to put our brush into our beverages. So let's just start with our brush here. This is a number 6 Sablette from Utrecht that I really love because it's got a really nice ferrule. This one's been crunched a little bit, but that's okay. And this comes to a good point. And you want this flexibility in your bristles, and then you also want this ability for your brush, your Sablette, to come to a nice point and hold that point so that you can have the versatility of making really fine linear marks and really nice big washes in the same brush. So I'm just going to take a little bit of water, and I'm going to put a little bit of water in my little palette. Now if you just bought your little palette and you've never used it before, it may have a little bit of almost like an oily film on it. Don't worry about that. It won't affect your paints, but it may be sort of like resisting your watercolor. Just give it a good scrub. If you want to just wash it with a little bit of Dawn and come back and work, that would be great. So I just picked up a little bit of red and I pulled it over into my water. And I want this color to be mobile, right? I want it to be really like moving around. I don't want my color to be sticky, and I don't want it to be so small that I can't pull from it again. So I want it to be nice and juicy. I want it to have that ability to move around. And I'm just gonna take that and I'm gonna pick it up on my brush, and I'm gonna move to this middle section, and I'm gonna make what I call a fence. And I'm just gonna make a little line around the edge, and then I'm going to come back and pick up a little bit more of my pigment, and I'm just going to fill this in. And this is a pretty thin true hue. Like, I could add a little bit more pigment here and it would be okay. So I just picked up a little bit more red, and I'm just going to drop that in. And when I say drop it in, I mean drop it in. I am barely touching my paper with my brush. I do not want to scrub. I don't want to scar my watercolor paper at this time. That might be something you do experimentally later on, but for right now the rules should sort of be drop that color on, just drop it on, and don't scrub your brush. Okay, I'm gonna go back. I have it cleaned, my brush. I'm just picking up water off the top of my water container, and I'm taking that little bit of water and I'm putting it in a new well. So now I should have more water than I have pigment, so I'm diluting my color in order to make that nice thin tint. I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to make my fence again. It's really traditional in watercolor to leave this little gap of the white of your paper in between two blocks of color, two washes, whatever it may be. Here's that spider skeleton that's over here, this little dry guy. I'm just gonna remove it. There we go. And then we all sort of know that this is because of drying time, because we don't want those two colors rushing into each other. So when you look at watercolor pieces, often you'll see these little halos, these little channels in between colors, and that's just because both of them were wet at the same time, and we don't want them running into each other. Okay, let's add the tiniest bit of black. So when I say the tiniest bit, I mean like the tiniest bit, so smaller than I can pick up on my brush from the actual palette. So I'm going to take my brush here and I'm going to just pull some black over, and I'm going to take, then I washed my brush off on the bottom of my water can here. You can use anything as your water receptacle. You can use your favorite like coffee mug that got chipped. You can use an old recycled salsa container. You can use whatever, you know. This used to hold hominy. Okay. And you take a little bit of black, like the tiniest bit, right, at the front of our brush here, and I'm going to take that back into this red over here that was my true hue to begin with, and now I have this nice shade. So now I'm going to make another fence and just pull this in, and if I want a little bit more pigment in there, I can come back, pull it in, and drop it back into this space. So there's my red. So I have my true hue and a tint of my red and a shade of my red. And I'm gonna do my primaries first. So now I'm gonna clean my brush, and I'm actually gonna clean my brush, so I'm pushing my bristles down on the bottom of my container, and then I'm just kind of like dragging it across the top of my container to get extra water off, so I'm not dripping water anywhere. And I can go to meet it with my paper towel just to clean it off and make sure that I don't have any more red in my bristles. Now I'm gonna take a little bit of water, move that into a well, pick up a little bit of yellow, move it over into my mixing palette. So now I have that in my well with a little bit of water. Make it so that it's nice and mobile, right? It's saturated but not too saturated, diluted but not too diluted. It's right there in the middle. And then I'm going to come down to number 5, and I'm going to make a nice little fence. Fill that in, and if I want it to be more yellow, I can put a little bit more, just drop a little bit more pigment in there. Okay, then I'm going to come back to my water, and I'm not going to clean, I'm just going to pick water up off the top, move that into my next little part of my well here. Now I've got just like a whisper of a yellow, like barely a yellow, and I can bring that over here. It's mostly water and just a tiny little bit of pigment. And maybe some of you are watching this on a fairly large computer monitor or screen here, and you can see that my paper almost looks like it's getting pilled along here. That's just the paper opening up to accept the pigment, and then it'll settle back down over time. So as your watercolor dries, it's going to dry up and your paper is going to settle down. So your colors are going to be lighter than when you laid them down, and then your paper is going to lay flatter than when you're working on it. And I'm going to take that little tiny bit of black that I pulled from over here, and yellow's super weak, so even the tiniest bit of black is going to give you like this crazy putrid green. So I'm going to go a little bit back and forth here. So I'm going to pick up a little bit more yellow, bring it back in. I just want to make that like slightly dark yellow, right? Like just a little bit of a shade. I can pull a little bit more black if I want to, but that black has so much blue in it, right? It's a really cold black, as most manufactured blacks are in watercolor pigments, and so you're going to get a little bit of a green tint, which sometimes can be nice. Like occasionally what you want is just that little bit of green tint, and you're like, hey, I know how to do that. You just put a little bit of black in your yellow, and I'm going to have that color perfectly. And now I'm going to move to blue. So I'm going to move a little bit of water over here, then I'm going to pick up some blue, move it over here. I've got this really beautiful middle blue that's like, it's not cobalt, it's not ultramarine, it's just kind of like this medium blue. Oh, it's so beautiful. Okay, and then I'm going to come over here, and in the middle I'm going to make my fence, and then I'm going to fill this in, and I want that to have a little bit more blue, so I'm going to pick up a little bit more pigment and just drop it in to fill that in. Then I'm going to pick up just water, right? So that I have mostly water and the tiniest bit of blue. And I'm going to lay down that tint. And maybe by now you've already got kind of a method worked out. You're like, okay, Corinne, I get it. Maybe you are a former student of mine and you've done this so many times with me that you're like, okay, fast forward. But this is a good wake up, you know? So if it's been a little bit since you have painted, making a watercolor color wheel is just gonna serve you well. So I put a tiny bit of black in my blue, and then I'm gonna drop a little bit more in here so it dries a little bit darker. There we go. Now I'm gonna mix my own orange. You can use your pre-made orange if you want to, but knowing that you can mix your colors is really important. So I'm bringing some yellow over here into this section where I just had a little bit of yellow and water already set up. You always want to start with your weaker color when you're mixing, so that you're just going to pick up a tiny bit of red and pull it over into your yellow. And ooh, that's pretty good. Actually, that's like a really nice middle of the line orange. If you want it to be a little bit more red, you can make it a little bit more red. Your orange and your neighbor's orange might not be the same, right? They might be slightly off, but they're in the orange family. Okay, so now I'm going to work in families. So I'm going to do my secondary here. I'm going to do my orange. So I start with my true hue here in the middle. Then I scoop some water off the top and I just pull it out to make my tint of that color. This is often when people ask me, how often do you change out your water? I am such a lazy painter. I only change out my water when it's absolutely affecting my colors. So if it's gotten so dingy that I can't handle it anymore, then I will go and dump it. I work with students who keep 2 or 3 cups of water at a time, or at least a clean and a dirty. If you're at home and you can really spread out and do whatever you want, have as many cups of water as you would like. I want a little bit more black in this. I just want it slightly darker. So I'm just gonna pick that up and move it over. There we go. Really nice shade. A little bit of orange and black. It's a great color. Boop. Okay. Now I'm gonna make my red orange and my yellow orange, right? My tertiary / intermediate steps at the same time, because I'm already in my families. So I'm kind of thinking about my orange family and my green family and my violet family. And I can work them much more quickly side by side than I can going all the way back through, you know. So if you want to work primaries, then secondaries, then tertiaries, you can. But I find that like when I work my families of color together, that I just move so much more quickly. So here I'm bringing my yellow over, and I just want my red orange to be more red than my orange, right? So then I'm going to come back, pick up a little bit more red than I did the last time, and I've just got this color that's not red and not orange. It's right in the middle, and so it's a really nice red orange. So it's a good half step in between these two colors. Oh, I'm getting wind. I'm getting a beautiful, beautiful wind. It's supposed to cool down here in Phoenix. It's been so hot. Ooh, look, I just made a drip. That was like right on cue. And I crossed a border. I must be rushing. Okay, so 2 things right here. If this kind of stuff bothers you, if a drip on your paper, especially if it's a beautiful piece you've been working on, just lift it quickly. Keep those paper towels close by. Boom, it's gone. And if this is like, oh, Corinne, I wanted to keep those all separate, and I'm a perfectionist and I like keeping everything perfect, lift it back up. Then just take your brush and just settle that down. Just add a little bit of water on there. I dripped again. I'm just carrying too much water in my ferrule, which is this metal part of your brush right here, and sometimes it can catch some water and drip on there. But I will also say, when you're making your color wheel, don't be a perfectionist. Just get to know your paints, right? Really learn, you know, what they're about. Look at this. I just had a little bit of black left in there, and I mixed the rest of my red orange in there, and it's like the perfect dark red orange, right? It's this great little shade. So I'm just gonna come in there, boom, make my little fence, fill it in, go on to my next color. So my next color is yellow orange, And it's exactly what it sounds like. It needs to be more yellow than it is orange. So I'm going to pick up my yellow again. Remember, you're always starting with your weaker color, and if you've got yellow in your mix, then yellow is always going to be your starting place because nothing is weaker than yellow. And we're just going to take that little bit of yellow and put the tiniest bit of red in there. I mean the tiniest bit. Just the tippy tip of my brush. Just barely making this like a little bit of a marigold color. A little bit of water, make that tint, right? You can see my colors that are drying side by side here, how they're ending up. So they're drying up really nice. Look at this, I got so much black on my brush. I picked up way too much and I set it down in the middle of my palette, and that is just like entirely too much black to mix into a yellow orange. So I'm just gonna lose that little bit of black, clean my brush out on the bottom of my container of water, and then just clear that out on my paper towel. A lot of people don't like to use paper towels, you know, so if you want to use the same washcloth over and over again, you know, and wash it every couple of times after you've painted, then go for it. But you just want something to lift and something to clean your brush with. Okay, this is usually the time when I introduce myself to my students and my students introduce themselves to me, and we kind of have this break in me telling you how to mix colors because you've got it, right? You're really getting it. So I will tell you a bit about myself, and I'll continue working and talking about watercolor and mixing colors here because I do want you to see this in real time. So right now what I'm doing is I'm just clearing out some mixing wells because I have these really like small amounts of contained, so I'm just putting a little bit more water in there, and then I'm taking my paper towel and I'm just clearing them out, right? And I could probably clear out all of these if I wanted to, and if you're at home and you're super close to the sink and you just want to stand up and wash your palette off, if you have a brand new palette, I want you to know that it's never going to be as clean as it was at the beginning of today, and that watercolors, although they are water soluble, they do stain, right? That's what we're doing, is we're staining our paper on purpose, and so your palette will always be a little bit stained. So I'm looking for a green right now that's not too blue and not too yellow. So I want this kind of middle of the line green, and I'm mixing my yellow and blue, and I started with my yellow and I'm just adding small amounts of blue, and I like this color. So I'm gonna pick this up, drop it in my green. Here you go, make my little fence, boom, 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 boom. And then pick up a little bit of water out the outside, make my tint, right? I have this really diluted green, mostly water and just the littlest bit of pigment. And then I'm gonna pick up a tiny bit of black, throw that in with my green, drop in my shade. Then I'm gonna mix my two tertiaries or intermediate colors, right? So I have my yellow green and my blue green. I'm gonna mix my yellow green first, and then I'm gonna mix my blue green after. So I'm gonna pick up a little bit of yellow again, and then put a little tiny bit of blue in that, right? I should end up with this nice lime green and keep cruising. If you're just joining me and you have no idea who I am, I am Corinne, and I love to teach. I've been teaching drawing, painting, craft, and printmaking since basically my 23rd birthday. I wanted to be an art teacher when I turned 10 years old. My grandfather was an artist. My first formal art class was when I was 6 years old. I just love it. I love everything about it. I love making work. I love sharing work. I really enjoy the critique process and talking to each other about what's working in our pieces and what's not working. I love colors and color theory. I have a history, I have a degree, a Bachelor's of Fine Art in Education from ASU, Arizona State University, and my emphasis was in printmaking. I love block prints and screen printing. I fell in love with intaglio and lithograph. I mean, I wanted to do all of it, and then I got into fibers and soft sculpture. And I used to teach this class called Print and Craft, in which we did exactly that, a lot of printmaking and a lot of crafting, and it was just like this amazing combination of things. And then as I've sort of transitioned out of teaching kids in public education and started teaching adults, I just really found this love of watercolor, and it's become my daily practice, and it's just so versatile. I can't tell you how much I love it. I just I can't get enough of it. My grandfather worked in watercolor, and he died when I was 6, and I was never close with him as an adult, of course, or as an artist, I should say. But he knew even when I was little how much I was going to love this, and really encouraged me. And watercolor, sometimes people tell me, well, it's the most difficult of all of the mediums, and I just don't agree. I think that watercolor is a medium in which you have to be really present, and you have to be really willing to let the water do what it's going to do, and then learn certain ways in which you can control it, but sort of be beholden at all times to the power of the water and what it's going to do. Like, look at this great little bloom that's happening where my water is evaporating, and I'm getting almost like these little crystallizations of the pigment along here. I can't make that mark with my hand, like only the water can make that mark, which is why I initially fell in love with printmaking, because I could make a mark in printmaking with a gouge or a scribe that was unlike any sort of drawn mark that I could make. And then screen printing changed that game even more for me. Like, cutting a stencil was so different than my drawing mark that I was just sort of floored by how much I loved it. So I think that really what people are saying when they talk about the idea of watercolor being difficult, right, being a challenging medium, is that you must relinquish control, and you have to lean into the mark that your paints are gonna make for you. So I'm mixing my violet here, and I started with my red because my red is weaker than my blue, and I just want to get this violet that's not red and not blue. And let's see where we're at. Ooh, that is deep. That is a dark one. I might drop the tiniest bit of this pre-mixed violet in here. Let's see. Ooh, that's like grapes. I don't really like that violet either. So let's come here, and I'm just gonna mix the two of these and get to a nice centerpiece. Here's what I'm gonna do. Look. I'm going to take a little bit of water, and I'm just going to lift this. I'm just going to reactivate my paper right here because I don't like that super dark plum color that I was laying down as my true purple. And then do you see all these fun little pepper tree flowers that are falling on my piece? I'm going to just kind of let them fall because I don't want to mess with the work that I've done. I might be able to blow some of them away. Here we go. There's a nice purple that's not too like grimace. It's kind of light though. There we go. Nice. Then I'm just going to take a little bit of water off the top, and I'm going to set that up. You can also drop in all of your pigments if you want to set them up with water first, and then just pick up small amounts and drop them in. That's a wet on wet practice. We'll talk more about that. We're working wet on dry right now, where our paints are wet and our pigments are dry. Ugh. Look at that gross violet. It's so intense. It's like a straight up Crayola color. Oh man, okay. I think I was telling you how much I love watercolor and how versatile it is and how it can be, you know, all of these different things. I love that it can be as finished as you want it to be, and that we have this really deep history of it built up within our vocabulary just from illustration and growing up with children's books. I think that we just see so much watercolor, and because of that, look at this, it's going such a crazy color. I want just a little bit. That red is warmer than I think it is. I always want to make it lighter than it is. There we go. That's a pretty good red violet though. Yeah. Let's see that. Oh yeah, that's a good red violet. Some of my reds are so cold, like alizarin crimsons, and you can make these really kind of winey colored, right? Like a beautiful Pinot Noir red violet. Adding black into these is difficult because it just makes them so dark, but it reminds you that you can already make such dark, dark values even without your blacks, just by saturating. And can you see here as we work around, and you see next to my red that this has already dried down, and all of that sort of like what appears to be pilling has stopped and flattened out. That's what's going to happen on your piece. So now I want a little bit of blue violet, which means I want just a little tiny bit of red mixed in with my blue. And I'm going to put a little bit of that pre-mixed violet in there as well, just to send it in the right direction. Oh yeah, look at that. That's a great color. I was looking at Patricia Polacco's work. I have two little girls that I mentioned earlier, and we have a large collection of illustrated children's books. And Patricia Polacco is one of my favorites. I can't hardly ever read her books without crying, but I think that's okay. And her watercolors are so interesting because they have so much graphite work underneath them, and then she just kind of like drops this little bit of color in there, and it's so exuberant and lovely, and it just has this really illustrative sense to it, and it just reminds me that watercolor can be so many different things. It can be really controlled and it can be really loose, and it's really fun all the time. That brings us all the way around. So we have our primaries, red, yellow, and blue, our secondaries, orange, green, and violet, and then our tertiary or intermediate colors, which are our following 6: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet, and red, violet. And that is our 12-step color wheel. I hope that you enjoyed this. I hope if you've never made a color wheel that it was pretty fun. And we'll just keep going back and referencing it. You know, my brother once asked me, why do you always teach the color wheel? And it's because this relationship of colors, seeing them as one continuous circle that just it never stops, right? It's like singing the Girl Scout song, right? A circle's round, it has no end. That's how long I want to be your friend. It has no end, right? You can start at red, you can start at yellow, you can start at orange, you can start at green, you can start wherever you want on the color wheel. And it's one continuous relationship of colors. So if you just think of red as 100% red and 0% yellow and 0% blue, and you work those percentages all the way around, you see that it's just a shifting scale, and that this circle is, you know, contained, and that from one side of the circle you have completely different relationships, and you have completely different temperatures, and you can start to see these little families of color, and you can see, look at this blue and orange drying together. Oh my gosh, they're going to make such great complements. And so I think it's just really helpful, and I'm thinking about color all the time, and this is how I'm thinking about color, is what is that relationship between the orange and the blue in the brown that I'm trying to mix, and how much more blue do I need in order to dull my orange. And if I put my violet and my yellow right next to each other, how are they going to affect one another? Or am I mixing these greens in my waxy leaves, and I need to come back to my color wheel and just look at like all this variation right in here in this little family, just using 3 greens, water, and a small amount of black. So you just have a lot of variation within your values and your color and your temperature just here, not even mixing, right, an orange and a blue together. So I hope you enjoyed this, and let me know. I need feedback right now. So if you did this, I'd love to see your color wheel. And if you need help, let me know. And I think that's really it. All right. Take care, you guys. Bye.